It is Friday, March 28th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Hot Shots episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. This is your final warning for those March games before they go away. Claim those and get that done. This coming Tuesday on the 1st, it's going to change over to RoboCop Rogue City, PS5, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, PS4, PS5, and then Digimon Story, Cyber Sleuth Hacker's Memory, PS4, which is a very wordy title, and quite frankly, a very ragtag group of games. The only thing I hear consistently amongst these three is that RoboCop is very good. The kind of game where even if you don't care about the IP, don't pass it off just yet. It's something where it's a very fun sci-fi shooter that kind of came out of nowhere. So there's something there to play, I guess is the better way to put it. But the other two I've heard a lot less about, so it does seem like a very random assortment of games, but it seems like that's been happening more and more frequently with PS Plus. Not to discredit Digimon or Texas Chainsaw, for example. Anyway, moving on to our first news story, we have a new PS5 system software update, this one being 25.02, 11.00. This one is not mandatory just yet, but it is that firmware that was in beta from about a month ago, a very minor firmware, so there's only a few changes. The primary one being they've made it simpler to view details and activities, so activity details are now fully displayed on cards, which the few games that I checked, there's no difference between the two pre and post firmware, so it might be highly dependent on the particular game and how that developer has chosen to use cards if they did use them in the first place. But there's that. There's also Unicode 16.0 emojis now being supported. You can use those in messages, and they've also adjusted parental controls based on restriction level for late teens or older, so you can change how they interact with communication and UGC content. And then they've, of course, improved the system performance and stability and improved the messages and usability on some screens. So it's been quite a bit now at this point where we've seen like a major firmware that has like a handful of changes that are like pretty dramatic, and I know folks are still asking for things like folders and themes and a handful of other things, but at this point it seems like going into we're already in the later half of the PS5 cycle, they're really starting to wind down this program in a way where we're just not seeing major changes anymore. You almost have to wonder if resources are now starting to funnel into what is eventually going to be a new UI for PlayStation 6. If that is where they are in the process right now, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems very consistent with what we saw with PlayStation 4, where it was really starting to wind down those major changes after like 2016, 2017. Moving on to some updates for PlayStation Studios, beginning with Ben's studio for Days Gone Remastered, which is coming out next month, April 25th, and we do know there are new trophies for that Horde Assault mode, permadeath mode, and also there's like a new collectible that has a separate trophy attached to it, and the good thing here is that we do know that yes, auto pop trophies are confirmed when you transfer over a PS4 save file, which was not like Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, which that was the first one that didn't do that, because all SIE published titles, if they were internal or external, we've seen that they support auto pop trophies when you transfer over that save, so they made a conscious decision for some reason with that game to not auto pop trophies. So in this case, you can. Obviously, the new trophies would probably be treated as DLC packages on the base game, so you could still auto-pop the platinum on the base game. It wouldn't be a full 100%, but there is that, and still no physical, which is a huge bummer. I'm very curious what the decision-making was behind that, because especially this is a game that I would figure is going to have no problem moving maybe over 1 million units, quite frankly. Days Gone did do very well, and so when we're talking lifetime sales for this native PS5 version, I could see it crossing over 1 million. That's a lot of copies this game could conceivably do, and SIE has still been very committed to physical games. Really, the only thing they haven't done was physical prints for Horizon Call of the Mountain, so PSVR 2 stuff, that, and Firewall Ultra. So it is like a really huge bummer that we don't have a physical print for this game. You would think that maybe they would do it eventually, maybe if it's only exclusive to PS Direct or something. You know, I'd like to see that happen at some point, but for now, it's still strictly a digital release. Next up, we actually just touched on this for our Tuesday conversation about every PS Studio developer, what they're doing, confirmed games, rumors, speculation. So for the Naughty Dog portion, it was about Intergalactic and when we can expect that game, which we have no confirmed release window. So it's a matter of, is it 26, 27? Now we're hearing it might actually be 2027. So recently on the PlayStation Studios OT on Reset Era, Bloomberg's Jason Schreier did clarify that both Intergalactic and The Witcher 4 are not going to be out next year, 2026, which shortly after this, speaking with IGN at the red carpet premiere for The Last of Us HBO Season 2, Neil Druckmann did say that the game is playable and really good right now, saying, and I quote, "It's really good. I'm so excited to finally put gameplay out into the world and show people about it because we just showed you the very, very, very tip on the iceberg. The game goes pretty deep beyond that." Now, it should go without saying that the guy that is directing the game is going to say nice things about the game he is directing. So that is not exactly surprising, but I mean, yeah, if it's been in development since 2020, they've probably got a very playable build from, say, point A to point B, the entire game, let's say, because things can look pretty broken still right up until they end up shipping the game. But either way, yeah, the news here really is that, okay, it is a 2027 game, and that also means we're now looking at a scenario of Naughty Dog going 7 years and nearly the entire PlayStation 5 lifecycle without shipping a brand new game, barring any sort of ports or remasters. Which sucks. I mean, it's always a point that needs to be made here, but it's not exclusively a Naughty Dog problem. Now, some studios, like your Insomniac, have done excellent during this generation, but I mean, that's few and far between. Like, for the most part, a lot of studios, big publishers, have just been dealing with these incredibly long dev cycles. You know, with us too, I mean, it's a new IP, right? So that takes a little bit longer to establish versus an existing property. There's still the 1.5, 2 year COVID delay that every team saw because they went from working at home or went from office work to working from home. And that obviously complicated things a bit. So, I mean, there's just so many sort of issues we can bring up, but it doesn't really excuse the idea that, like, it still sucks, generally speaking, to go this long for, a new entry from Naughty Dog. More so because, like, they would have had something new, but that was canceled, and that was The Last of Us multiplayer. So now it is just this one game coming towards the end of the PS5 cycle, which if you're, say, an early adopter and you know you're going to buy a PS6 right away, then you have that sort of conflict of, all right, do I buy this game 2027 when I know just a better version is going to come out on PlayStation 6 in 7-8 months or something, if it does, launch holiday 27. But it's just, that's a bigger conversation to be had. It does seem like this probably is going to be a 2027 game, which is disappointing, but that's just the world we live in, unfortunately. Now, moving on to something that we also touched on for the Tuesday roundup, which is this new revelation about the God of War Remaster rumor, and that it's not actually a remaster, so it kind of got a little bit screwy here, but we are hearing from Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb, where he clarified that there's no remaster collection, but there is a new side story project coming this year, where it is about Kratos, and it is a video game, so it's not going to be a comic book or something like that. But he did elaborate on his previous post by saying he was never told about a remaster collection, but he asked a source about the rumors that he saw about the remaster, so he's talking about something that happened in the past, which predates the original post on Blue Sky, and they told him that no God of War would show up at the previous state of play, but could show up at the anniversary. And so, in a weird way, Grubb was looking at the existing rumors about the remaster, and I guess assumed that it was a thing and asked a source, and that source never clarified that it's not a remaster, just saying that, yeah, something God of War is coming, and it might show up at the 20th anniversary, and then for some reason that didn't happen. But now, looking further into it, he's like, oh, I found out it's not actually a remaster. So a little bit misleading on his part, if we're being honest, because that dials back to, like, what I was saying a few months ago, which was like, I don't know how much weight we should really be putting into this remaster collection rumor. Jeff Grubb was the first one where it seemed like, okay, maybe there's some actual weight to this thing. And it's like, okay, well, let's rationalize that. If they're gonna give any PS2 game special treatment, it's probably the God of War games. But now it makes more sense, given that you can tie that back to what Tom Henderson said, what he heard about these games, which is that he didn't really look too much into it, but he had heard that there is a side project story, a young Kratos going back to Greece, and we are hearing it's going to come out this year. So I guess we don't have to speculate much more on something that we may very well find out about soon enough. But that's sort of where we're at, which is no collection of the Greek games. They're not going to do anything special there, which means it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. It's like, okay, well, they'll probably just show up on PS Plus Premium with implicit conversions, emulating them, and that's sort of how you play the games locally nowadays, which would still be a great solution, I find. But there's probably that happening, and then we'll find out what they're going to do with this new game. Jeff Grubb did say that it's not the next big Santa Monica epic, so I think the implication there is that maybe this is just a code development thing where it is very much a Miles Morales or Lost Legacy type of situation, a smaller story that they can sort of turn out with another studio in collaboration, and maybe that's what we're going to end up seeing. So with that in mind, we'll leave it there, and we'll play the waiting game to find out more info on what's going on with this God of War game. Now, in other God of War news, what we can say is that Sony did still celebrate the 20th anniversary in what I would say is a very classy way, because they put out a thank you video where it was just super hype, going over every God of War game. It was like 4 minutes long. They were ramping up the Bear McCreary soundtrack from Ragnarok, and just one of those things where, you know, you really start to wax nostalgia and get a little teary-eyed if you're a long-time God of War fan. It was a really nice video. Of course, no game announcement or anything like that, but as we've said, sometimes those things are just really hard to line up, and it seems like they did have something that for some reason didn't make the announcement. But with that said, the video was great, and also they put out this amazing photo from the panel that took place where you have T.C. Carson and Christopher Judge, our two God of Wars, just looking dope as hell with two God of War like Super Bowl rings or something. It looked amazing. Just straight gangster. I loved it. T.C. Carson, I met him during Retro Game Con in October last year. Super fun. We were moderating the panel, and that was my first time doing it, so I was nervous and I was awful at it, and TC was just owning the room and answering questions from fans, and it was like such a fun time. But he was a sweetheart. He was really nice, and so it was like just a great picture to see those two, man. Just one of those things that you do feel a little bit of fan appreciation with how far the franchise has come. So it was a really nice video, and that photo was amazing. Now, on the flip side of that, we also had Bloodborne's 10th anniversary come and go, and Sony did not say a thing. Absolutely nothing. No appreciation for Bloodborne in 10 years since the game came out, which, here's the thing, right? If they say something, it's bad. If they don't, it's bad. So I will always make that point very clear as far as like the Bloodborne meme and them still not doing anything with it on PS5 or PC. I would say, like, you would rather them say something as to why they didn't. Maybe it was like they put all their eggs in one basket this year or this celebration, and it was very clearly God of War, which was, 20 years, and it's in fairness, a lot more relevant of an IP to them nowadays versus, say, a Bloodborne. So just seems like maybe they had that conflict of interest of wanting to really go all out for God of War, and Bloodborne was just too close to that. I don't know. I would say that's probably what's happening, because in a weird way too, Sony does always remember and make callbacks to Bloodborne pretty frequently. And that's why that's the argument I always make, is you want them to do that versus nothing at all. So I know people get mad immediately, whether it's silence or something, but you always want something. So it actually was not great to have them straight up not do much of anything for Bloodborne's 10th anniversary. But with that in mind, we still might see something at some point, but for now, it's still not happening. Let's move on to some classic game news, beginning with Killzone, where we're hearing from the series composer that they would like to see these games brought back in some way. So speaking with Videogamer.com about the PlayStation Concert Tour, the series composer, Joris de Man, was asked about seeing Killzone come back in some form, and they responded with, and I quote, "I know that there have been petitions for it. I think it's tricky because I can't speak for Guerrilla or anything. I don't know if it will ever happen. I hope it will, because I think it is quite an iconic franchise, but also I think it kind of has to take into account kind of the sensibilities and the shift in, I guess, what people want, because it is quite bleak in some ways." Now, I think if the games ever did get moved over to modern hardware, PS4, probably at this point PS5 and PC, also give it pro support, they're not going to go out of their way to change certain elements of the game or something like that. I would expect and certainly hope that the games remain fundamentally what they were on PS3. But here's the thing, if they do that, my God, would I love that. I mean, it's the same conversation that always pops up with PS3 stuff, which is it's stuck on PS3 and people want ports of like Infamous and Killzone and Puppeteer, and there's just a handful of games we could list off. It's a laundry list at this point. Killzone I would love to see on PS5 and give it pro support, and I mean if you give that game just a resolution boost and frame rate, I mean it would look gorgeous without doing much else because the game still looks unbelievable on PlayStation 3. And it's still such a unique FPS, in my opinion, with that very heavy gun feel. And you can always just really get a sense of that bullet feedback when you're firing and the recoil. It has a very distinct feel as far as first-person shooters go. I think if it came back and more people are exposed to those, original releases on PS3 with Killzone 2 and 3, they might even be a little bit put off by how heavy the game does feel. But yes, I would love it. If it will happen, it's unlikely at this point, at least for that particular game, or rather those particular types of games, which are a lot of PlayStation 3 titles. I would love for them to eventually touch them and do something, but for the time being, it's just wishful thinking and conversating like Yoris is having in this Talk with Video Gamer. In other classic game news, and also in keeping with what Sony did prior for Freedom Wars Remastered on PS Vita, where they licensed out that game to Bandai Namco, they're doing more of that now with, again, Bandai Namco. So this popped up during yesterday's Nintendo Direct, of all places, to make these announcements where Everybody's Golf Hot Shots, so the Eastern and Western names for that franchise packaged into one, that's coming this year to PS5, Nintendo Switch, and Steam, and also Patapon 1+2 Replay coming July 11th this year for PS5, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. And again, licensed out to Bandai Namco. They're actually developing these internally, so in the case of Clap Hands, they're not involved, so they didn't get the game back, essentially. But it is something where Sony still owns the IP, but they're licensed out, and now they can be exposed to new audiences. And these two games, not only do I think these are the kind of candidates that track with what we saw with Freedom Wars Remastered, but it is interesting in that with Hot Shots, it looks like it's a repackaged World Invitational, so another PS Vita game, so that would make sense. And then for Patapon, a little bit weird because Patapon 1 and 2 have already been remastered on PS4, which by proxy they're playable on PlayStation 5, but this is still something where they're trying to package them into one executable on new platforms, and that still means there is a new native PS5 version with trophies, and also this new package is going to have some what seem to be accessibility options, so you can adjust the difficulty per game and also adjust the input timing as well, so that might be very helpful for some people. But these two games, I mean, I think this is exactly the kind of IP we were talking about when initially they did that what seemed very experimental sort of title they put out, which was Freedom Wars Remastered. Or rather, they didn't put that out because that's the whole benefit of licensing the IP out to somebody else, is that they can handle it, fulfill it, market, develop, do all those things, and there's clearly an agreement in place where Sony will still collect some sort of royalty or payment or whatever the case is. But it really does sort of address the key issue where we always discuss these older dormant properties. It's like, yes, Sony owns a lot of stuff, and there's always very loud fandoms that want to see them go back and do a sequel or port or just do something with these properties. Well, this is that something because, again, logistically, when you have so many properties in your ownership, there's only so many resources at your disposal as far as like in-house or even external studios, right? So this is a very win-win-win scenario. Sony gets to do something with these IP, somebody else gets to ship them, fulfill them, take care of all that. You've got new audiences, and I think that's very purposeful here because these showed up during a Direct. I think as of filming right now, there's still no PlayStation blog post for these games. You wouldn't know that there are PS5 versions on the way as well. So it's a very clear Direct effort to get these games out there, and I think that's great. It should really benefit most parties involved, and that just means more people get to play the games and they're more financially viable long term if we eventually do ever see another Patapon or Hot Shots or something, right? I think we should see more of this. Freedom Wars did appear to very much be that sort of pilot program, and I say that, but very likely that could have been greenlit around the same time as these other titles, so they're still kind of sussing out what they want to do moving forward. But Bandai Namco seems to be a great partner so far, and we'll see these games on PlayStation 5, PC, and Steam later this year, and I'm just wondering what else will we see, because there is so much in that back catalog, and I think a lot of these things could do wonders on Switch. We'll have to wait and see. Moving on to some news for the PlayStation 5 console exclusive Phantom Blade Zero, where we're hearing from Eurogamer that they're taking a very interesting approach to how they're trying to develop the game, which goes back to some earlier prior generation roots. So recently, the director, when speaking with Eurogamer, gave this quote where they say, "We want to get back to the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era, when the games were not so big, the budget's not sky high, the team manageable, and all the developers were passionate and creative and with experience. It's like a bigger indie game, but with budget and with experience and with a stable hand. And everything feels so integrated from the starting point when you press down the start button to the finish point of the staff list." This is definitely a fascinating comment in that it's been well known and discussed with a lot of big name game directors that, nowadays, and really this was maybe around the mid PS3 cycle, getting into definitely PS4, where team sizes were ballooning past 100 plus people. So you got to a point where you didn't know everybody on staff, and you had all these more highly specific roles, because during PS1, PS2, there are so many examples of somebody doing sound and then lighting, and then also a certain gameplay element that they were in charge of, or maybe they were handling all aspects of a game, like programming, for example, right? I mean, there's just everything sort of ballooned to the size that it is nowadays, and it almost seems like they're speaking from experience in that they want to try and get down to a point where we know what we want to build. We don't want to overstay our welcome, because I think they've said before this game's in the 20-30 hour neighborhood or something like that, which, you look at a game like this and it does look technically very polished and gorgeous, and there's a lot of enthusiasm surrounding it, but you might walk away thinking this should be a 100-hour game or something, which maybe that stigma always comes from the appearance of it being Souls-like, and we know it's not Souls-like, but the game is going to be a bit more grounded and be in and out the door, I guess, right? But there is that pressure too of, with Black Myth Wukong, that game shipped, did incredibly well. So there's a lot of these Chinese games that are getting so much attention now, and they're still kind of in that sweet zone where there is a lot of attention and a lot of investment as well. And so there's more pressure seeing Wukong do well, and so they're getting a lot of funding. But it will hit this tipping point, I suspect, and that people will then get a little bit tired of these games and move on. And then you've got all this investment for these projects that have still not come out just yet, or maybe another round of funding for games that will then ship in the 2030s, and those will end up doing awful because at that point, a lot of people have moved on. So it's maybe within their best interest to kind of, in a way, go back to those PS1, PS2 days. I don't know if you can necessarily do that to the same degree. You look at this game and you're not really you're not as well-oiled of a machine as a PS2 team probably was back in the day. It's way too different, but I do sort of appreciate that approach of maybe we'd like to get back around to those times and not overstay our welcome with this game. Moving on to not necessarily news, but it's been a talking point lately, and I want to at least throw my hat into the ring here of Sony possibly blocking their PC games on Xbox hardware, because that's been a growing discussion as of late, where we're seeing more and more indications of Microsoft wanting to, in the next cycle, make an Xbox that maybe is just more of a hybrid PC, or basically a PC in a console shell, which also begs the question of, if they make this sort of dressed up, optimized Windows UI in a console package, but if you can break out of that and just treat this thing like a computer and install Steam, which means they then have access to PlayStation Studio games, that would be a very weird roundabout way to start getting PlayStation games on Xbox, right? But that's the question, because we know Sony has made an effort prior to block games from GeForce Now, which were then at the time available on Xbox hardware. So recently, this debate popped up again from Jez Corden of Windows Central, asking straight up, if the next Xbox does support Steam or the Epic Game Store, will Sony block their games on PC? Which Jez then quote retweeted that, trying to correct people who said that Sony can't do that, and he said they absolutely 100% can, and he referred to the GeForce Now situation. Now, the issue is that, and a lot of people did point this out, but GeForce Now, that was a separate service, and they actually did get in a lot of hot water because they were doing that without publishers' express permission. They had to arrange those deals, and that was what was happening during the beta period. Then the actual launch, I guess publishers opted out or something, and so it was kind of a back and forth, and so it was very much still a thing where it's a separate service, and agreements had to be in place, and that's where you can discriminate on playability and where the service shows up and where your games show up, obviously. Steam, as far as we know, is not like that, and that's the issue. Me and John talked about this too on a Click R3 from last month or something, but like I don't think you can discriminate hardware. You know, it doesn't matter if you publish games on that platform, on Steam in this case, you don't get the choice to discriminate on where that software is played. If Steam can launch on something, then you can just start playing those games if the system can do it. I don't think there, and here's the thing too, Steam is a private company. They're not beholden to anybody. There's no direct agreement with Sony or anything like that. Like there's nothing there. I don't think there is any grounds for Sony to do that, unless there's some sort of precedent that can be set in the future. But I don't think Steam would play ball. So that's the weird thing, right? I do find that it might get very muddy when you talk about contractual obligations on a game-by-game basis, which is that, you know, there are very much lawyer-drafted contracts of, you know, let's say it's timed exclusivity or some sort of third-party exclusive or whatever the case is. But Sony obviously does a lot of PS5 console exclusives, which means the games still ship on PC. So in that example where there's an express agreement of the game can be on PC but not on competing platforms, and that would be like, Xbox, for example. But what does that look like when Xbox is like a hybrid PC, basically? Does Steam have to at that point step in and oblige to that contractual agreement in the interest of having the PC version come out and barring the Xbox hardware release because there's a roundabout way to get that game playable on the Xbox? That I don't know. I don't think anybody has that answer. And there still begs the question of why would Microsoft do this in the first place? Why would you want competing storefronts on, like, even if they are going for this hybrid PC, basically a PC console setup, you know, it's still a conflict of interest when you have a store that is going to offer so many better priced games competing against your store. And so, I mean, there's that argument to be had in the first place. But just for the sake of this conversation, I don't think Sony can do that. I don't know why Jez would so confidently 100% say that when I don't think nobody has the answer to that. Because it's just something that we've never seen happen before. And perhaps by the time Microsoft launches new hardware, we will find out our answer. Now, we just had to mention this first-class way to announce a release date for a PS5 game, and that is Xbox's Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, confirmed for PlayStation 5, April 17th. So the game is coming in April, and it's very soon. But they put together this really amazing trailer where you have Nolan North and Troy Baker in there. Nolan, of course, clearly representing Nathan Drake. And it was just a really cool way to announce a game. Also weird because Troy is in like a billion PlayStation games as well as different characters, so you've got that aspect to consider. But coming soon, a physical copy confirmed as well with a collector's edition. I do want to point out there's also a disclaimer on the collector's edition promo image that says internet is required to download the game and content. There's been some conflicting reports on if that is for the base game or if it's for the additional content. Let's hope that they're actually printing the game on the disc, because my God, I will be livid if that keeps happening, because for the love of God, we have 100 gigabyte Blu-ray discs on PlayStation. We can, for the most part, in a lot of cases, print the full game, a full gold master on the disc. So we don't want to do this thing where it stubs and you need to download a portion of the game after the fact. Let's hope we're wrong about that. Moving on to a new patent filed by Sony Interactive Entertainment. This was spotted by Tech for Gamers, and it's for an operation device, which, to put it plainly, the actual patent is for putting solar photovoltaic elements and cells in a controller so you charge it that way. And that is one of those things where you might read the headline of this and think, oh, cool. You spend 5 seconds thinking about it, though, and then you realize this completely falls apart. So I do want to say, there is that, solar remote that Samsung put out last year or something. That is a thing. But remotes, I would hope people know, like, it's a very low powered device that you kind of use one time and set it down. And so, sure, like, even that might seem a little bit weird, but it's low power enough to where it can trickle charge in even worst case scenarios, because obviously we're talking about indoor items. So in the case of a remote, like, even if you're, depending on how much sun exposure your living room is getting per se and what direction it's facing, north, south, east, west, even in like poor conditions, if it's like north facing or something and you're not near a window, you'll still probably trickle charge enough to where the remote can last a long time before you have to change out batteries or whatever the case is. But controllers, I mean, you're always holding it, you're always using it in session. And so I don't know if like the sales pitch here is like, oh, you leave it out next to your window to let it get direct sunlight exposure, which that just sounds bad because, with different colors, you're going to sun damage the controller if that turns into the habit. And also, just generally speaking, a lot of people like to play in darkness or at nighttime, or they don't want windows open, or I don't know, we're talking about gamers here. I don't know. It's one of those really weird things where in practice, I don't think there's like any usability here. It's like trying to solve a problem that's not really there. I don't know. It seems silly to put R&D into something like this that might just add to the cost of the controller, when in the grand scheme of things, it wouldn't really add as much charge as one would typically think. So I just wanted to rant about that. That's one of those patents where I'm like, this is stupid. They're not doing this. Unless there's something I'm missing here, but I would think that's like solving a problem that's not really there. Make a wireless charging pad. That would be the most useful thing versus solar charging a controller. Next up, we have some GDC news stories to go over. The Game Developers Conference, which we are hearing that, yes, in the most unsurprising news possible, publishers are trying to avoid Grand Theft Auto 6 like the plague. So recently, Christopher Dring was speaking on his new site and his new podcast, The Game Business, and he was talking about some discussions he had at GDC this year, where 3 executives at well-known publishers have apparently made it clear they are trying to avoid GTA 6 like the plague. They said, and I quote here, "Rockstar Games always suck a lot of money and, more importantly, time out of the market. We don't want to be anywhere near that. We are working up multiple different plans for our titles." Another executive said, and I quote, "Even without GTA, it's immensely difficult to find free time for new games to shine. Time is the real scarcity for us, not money. It's tough out there." Another executive said, "We don't want to launch just before or just after the game. If it arrives in late October, that means you either have to launch early, which a lot of people seem to be doing with the recent glut of summer release dates, or go later, putting you up against the Black Friday sales." The thing I'm curious about is what Sony will or will not do. We know they have things later in the year. You would think later in the year, that would be Ghost of Yotei, and then it depends if they plan on shipping this Horizon multiplayer game this year. That reads to me like a summer game, and now we're hearing about another God of War title, which, where does that end up? I mean, we know DS2 is summer. Sony historically has never really had a problem cannibalizing their own games, just in that if it's ready to come out, they'll put something right next to another big game of theirs. It's a weird thing that Sony does, but like if something's ready, they just put it out there. So will that be their attitude, or will they still be of the mind that most other publishers are facing in the same way? And maybe somebody at Sony made that comment because these were all anonymous, but you do want to give this game a very clear runway, not just in the interest of your own titles because Sony has some, but Sony is a platform holder. So really for them, do they really want to go up against a game when it's something... They're so well positioned to benefit from it. They're the really de facto high-end console right now. So it's like, okay, even if our games are ready and we can ship it near GTA 6, why would we do that? Let's just give them a clear runway and, hey, help us sell a bunch of PlayStation 5s. We'll hang on to whatever game we plan on releasing and make sure it's just a little bit away from that. I think Sony would even want to be mindful of that. Because we know they've gone out of their way to ship 2 Horizon games next to a Legend of Zelda or an Elden Ring. But in this case, I mean, I think it would maybe be a bit more ideal to just let this game do its thing. Now, the other news coming out of GDC, and again from Christopher Dring on his new The Game Business show, he also talked about the general sentiment that he's hearing about the tariffs and the Trump administration and what's going on there, which he was actually surprised that there wasn't a whole lot of that going on as far as concerns. Now, he did hear that for the platform holders, they actually were acting very swift after the last Trump administration. So one executive from GDC says that with a lot of the manufacturing taking place in Vietnam, they're all pretty much well positioned there. As for physical games, we didn't hear a whole lot on the PlayStation side of things, but he did talk about Switch 2 because that's likely going to move a lot of units, and those are all made exclusively in Japan. So Nintendo's pretty good there. But as far as like the other facilities, U.S. publishers do usually lean on local firms, and as we've said before, Sony has their plant in Terre Haute, Indiana. So I still find that they're okay there. So it sounds like as far as tariffs go in the video game space, for now, any sort of costs are being absorbed, or they can be absorbed somewhat safely with manufacturing coming out of, a lot of manufacturing coming out of Vietnam. And then with Sony physical games, we'll still watch that closely. But I still, as far as I understand it, know that they should be okay for the most part. Moving on to a seismic update for the Ubisoft story where they might be considering doing something with their IP, selling it off, establishing a new company. Well, now we know that they did indeed establish a new subsidiary where it's valued at $4 billion, and Tencent is going to be a 25% stakeholder, investing $1.16 billion. This new subsidiary will house the teams and IP responsible for Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six, basically the most lucrative and relevant properties for Ubisoft right now, and what that means for the remainder of the parent company and the other IP, that is unknown. There's a statement that, or an internal memo that was sent out, and that's been already published online, so I would not feel very good if I was at Ubisoft right now and I was on the one side of the coin, which is at the parent company with all the dormant or not very good properties right now, your Rayman, Just Dance, Prince of Persia, things like that, because they do own a lot. But this could not be more clear as far as what the Guillemot family is doing, like what their play is here, because they still have always wanted to maintain control of the company. So they pretty much just cherry-picked the three most valuable, lucrative things and said, we'll do a new company. And now it's like, what are they going to sell off or close, or what's going to happen to the other side? That is where I think it's not going to look too good, and I would not feel safe at all if I was on that side of the coin. So, I mean, Ubisoft is one of the last few big third-party publishers, and to see them in this kind of turmoil and make these kind of plays, and it really, I think, falls to the stubbornness of the Guillemot family as well. So to see them do this, and this is the route they're taking, I don't know if this is like the best way to go, But I also wouldn't want to say that I have all the answers because I clearly don't. I don't know what the best play would have really been there for them, but you can see what they're trying to do, and my concern is now deeply with anybody on the other side of that coin. We'll see what happens with Ubisoft over time, but for now, that was the big change. Next up, we've got something that kind of came out of nowhere, but also not really. So the news here, if you heard, is that an Until Dawn prototype on PS3, a full playthrough popped up on YouTube. Now, it's not entirely surprising because that's the weird thing is that we've actually had a lot of stuff archived already of this game, but for those that don't remember, Until Dawn initially was in development at London Studio as a PlayStation Move game. Then it was moved over to Supermassive, still had some PlayStation Move functionality, but then it was initially dropped and moved to PS4 and moved to Decima because I think that game was on the SingStar engine or something like that. The game obviously saw a very big overhaul, but there has been a lot of like design docs and screenshots and footage documented from this YouTube channel, which this stuff came out like 3 years ago. So the new information here is that the Digital Preservation YouTube channel put out a full playthrough of a PS3 prototype from January 2013, and it's the full thing, like from start to finish, every chapter, because before we've only had like a few chapters from different builds. I don't know how they got all this stuff, but it's still cool to see because the full playthrough, you can see that like despite the placeholder voice acting and there's terrible performance, well, it's on PS3, so comes with the territory, but you've got that, low-res textures, placeholder assets and animations. Like the thing is still very broken and not ready for retail, but it's like still complete enough to where you could sit there and watch it and it looks like a full-blown damn video game that is, for the most part, playable. And I've never sat through the whole thing because I know it's very different. Like I don't want to say very different, but like there's different characters and the plot plays out in a different path. And so it's one of those things where I'd love to look at it or actually just install the build and play it myself. But yeah, that was cool to see because the headlines came out. We've already had a lot of footage, but there is a full playthrough now that you can watch in context, I guess would be the more ideal way to put it. But it's always amazing seeing these things. And Until Dawn did have a bit of a turbulent history going from London studio to then Supermassive and dropping PS Move support and going over to PlayStation 4. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was checking in on PlayStation Studios, all internal and external developers or signed agreements, going over confirmed games, release timelines, rumors, speculation, all that good stuff. It's been a while since we checked in on PS Studios, so we've got a more recent roundup live on the channel. And then coming up, I probably will finally do the Astrobot speedrun levels on Sunday. Already filmed it, just have to upload it, but we can finally do that. And then probably a Tuesday upload, and we are also filming Click R3 next week as well, and that will probably go live on Wednesday or Thursday. Thank you all so much for the support on Click R3. That's been a lot of fun with our bi-weekly show. We're really ramping up on the episodes and finding our footing, and so it's been great having some more extended, like long-form coverage that we can do for these news stories. And so that's been good. That'll be probably again Wednesday, Thursday, and that I think is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.